Most people reduce desire to something biological. Neurons firing, hormones surging, instincts pushing. But when we look more deeply, we begin to realize that desire is not merely a physical urge. It is a signal of something far more foundational. It reveals our orientation to the world, our sense of lack, and our drive to bridge that lack through connection, transformation, or transcendence. For men, this is especially true. Their desire is not simply rooted in sexuality or reproduction. It is a symbolic act, an existential movement toward a fuller participation in reality. Desire, then, is the deep cry of being for significance. It is a seeking, not just of pleasure, but of purpose. It tells us that the male self is not static. It wants to become, to break out of limitation, to actualize. When a man desires, what he is often truly reaching for is not the object, but an identity that possessing or achieving that object will confirm. A relationship is not just a union. It is a mirror. Success is not just wealth, it is worthiness. Influence is not just power, it is validation. So underneath every layer of what appears to be physical desire lies an existential question: do I matter? Am I enough? Am I becoming what I was meant to be? Desire operates as a form of participatory knowing. It puts us into a relationship with reality in which we are drawn beyond ourselves. And in that drawing out, we become open to transformation. A man does not merely want to consume experience, he wants to be changed by it. This is the essence of existential desire. The pursuit of a goal is not about the outcome. It is about what kind of man he must become in order to attain it. The romantic gesture, the career climb, the commitment to mastery in a skill, these are vehicles through which the self is stretched. It's not just about desire as outcome, it's desire as pathway to self-realization. In this way, male desire is deeply teleological. It always points beyond. And it is in that pointing that a man comes to understand not only what he wants, but who he is. This is why suppressing desire or treating it as something shameful often leads to alienation. When a man is taught that his deepest yearnings are a threat or a liability, he is not simply taught to hide. He is taught to distrust his own becoming. This disconnection becomes internalized. He no longer sees desires as sacred signposts, but as dangerous signals to be managed, ignored, or numbed. Over time, this breeds a profound existential disorientation, because when you strip a man of his capacity to desire authentically, you are not making him more moral. You are making him more fragmented. His inner compass begins to malfunction. He loses the ability to discern what truly matters. He becomes susceptible to false desires. Addictions, status games, shallow thrills, because the deeper longing for relevance has been buried. And what has been buried turns to H. True male desire is not chaotic. It is directional. It moves a man to coherence. And coherence is not uniformity. It is harmony between what he is, what he wants, and what he's becoming. Desire becomes the thread that connects these dimensions. When a man follows his desire with wisdom and humility, he does not become more selfish. He becomes more awake. He realizes that what he desires is not always what he thinks he desires. He learns to distinguish between desire as distraction and desire as vocation. And it is in this discernment that he steps into maturity, not by repressing desire, but by integrating it. Desire in its purest form is an invitation to meaning. It whispers that life is not enough unless it is lived with purpose. And so, when we say male desire is existential, we are naming a fundamental truth, and that a man's longing is not a problem to be solved, but a process to be honored. In that process, he finds who he is, not through withdrawal from the world, but through courageous engagement with it. He becomes not just a seeker of experiences, but a builder of values, a cultivator of wisdom, and a presence that matters in the lives of others. To desire is to awaken to what is possible. To desire rightly is to walk the path from potential to presence. There is a mistaken belief that men are primarily motivated by pleasure or ease, that what they desire most is a life without friction. But that assumption fails to grasp the deeper architecture of the male psyche. What men actually crave, often silently, sometimes unknowingly, is not comfort, but the experience of carrying meaningful weight. It's not the absence of struggle that brings fulfillment, but the presence of significance within the struggle. Comfort without consequence becomes numbness. A man stripped of purpose, stripped of weight, begins to drift. Not because he lacks capacity, but because he lacks something worth bearing. From the time boys begin to recognize their distinctiveness from the world, they begin looking for a path toward identity. But identity is not given, it is forged. And it is forged in relationship to responsibility. A man becomes a man not simply because he reaches a certain age or performs a certain act, but because he takes on a burden and does not abandon it. He steps into a role, into a calling, and allows the pressure of that role to shape him. Whether that burden is to protect, to build, to serve, or to lead, it is the very carrying of that burden that sculpts his being into something noble. This is why men will often create challenge even when life appears easy. There is something within the structure of male desire that seeks friction, not out of self-sabotage, but out of a yearning to prove and improve the self. When we observe men in states of deep fulfillment, we often find they are carrying something heavy. A family, a mission, a discipline. But the heaviness is not crushing them, it's elevating them. That is the paradox. In taking on more than just themselves, they begin to transcend themselves. They move from being consumers of meaning to creators of it. The desire for greatness, for mastery, for legacy is not arrogance. It's often the soul's attempt to climb toward coherence in a world that often fragments. And without something to climb, without the necessary resistance of gravity, that soul becomes untethered. So men reach for weight, not always consciously, but intuitively. They test limits, challenge norms, and seek out arenas of proving not because they are reckless, but because they are searching for transformation. The male drive for conquest is often misinterpreted as domination, but more often, it is the search for a moment when the self meets its edge and must go beyond it. Whether in sport, in business, in battle, or in philosophy, the challenge provides the container for growth. And the deeper truth is this: men desire that which makes them necessary. When a man feels replaceable, or worse, irrelevant, his soul begins to deteriorate. But when he knows that his presence carries weight, that his strength matters to someone beyond himself, that his choices have impact, he steps into vitality. He becomes animated by responsibility. And responsibility, rather than being a trap, becomes a gateway to meaning. This is why the pursuit of comfort often leads to malaise. When everything is automated, handed over, digitized, outsourced, what is left for the self to do? Without challenge, the self atrophies. This is not a call to romanticize suffering, but to recognize that suffering in service of something sacred can become a vessel for awakening. Male desire isn't about escaping pain, it's about choosing the right kind of pain. The kind that stretches, the kind that builds, the kind that initiates. When a man finds a burden worth carrying, his life aligns, energy returns, focus sharpens, the distractions lose their hold. He doesn't need to be entertained because he's enthralled by a deeper task. He no longer chases meaning. he becomes a source of it. This is why those who remove all struggle from a man's path are not doing him a favor. They are robbing him of the friction that forms identity. The male soul was not designed to float. It was designed to forge. And forging requires fire. So when we say that men hunger for weight, we are saying they long for the opportunity to matter. Not theoretically, but concretely. They want their choices to carry real consequences. Their commitments to shape outcomes. Their existence to ripple through the lives of others. To feel that what they do echoes beyond themselves is to feel alive. And it is in that aliveness that desire finds its deepest expression. Not in the pursuit of ease, but in the dance with difficulty that sharpens the self into something capable, courageous, and deeply real. We live in a time where male desire is often viewed with suspicion. It is pathologized, ridiculed, or silenced, not necessarily out of malice, but out of cultural confusion. In this climate, men are taught not to trust what arises from within. They are conditioned to disconnect from the signals of their own longing, to be suspicious of their passions, and to prioritize external approval over internal clarity. But this suppression does not eliminate desire. It distorts it. Repressed male desire does not vanish. It mutates. What begins as a yearning for meaning becomes redirected into addiction, distraction, or aggression. Not because men are inherently broken, but because they are starved of orientation. The crisis is not one of morality. It is one of meaning. When desire is cut off from purpose, it turns chaotic. When a man's deepest longings are labeled dangerous or inappropriate before they are ever understood, he begins to internalize a messaging that who he is at the core is flawed. Over time, this creates fragmentation. He appears functional on the surface, but underneath he is unmoored. His actions no longer emerge from a coherent self. They are reactive, compensatory, often erratic. This is the modern condition of many men, not simply overstimulated, but underoriented. They are flooded with images, expectations, and narratives, yet lack the tools to make sense of what they feel and why they feel it. And because they are cut off from their own inner compass, they become vulnerable to manipulation. Consumerism, status games, and digital addiction prey on this confusion. They offer quick hits of simulated desire while eroding the pathways that lead to genuine fulfillment. Desire at its root is about direction. It points toward what is lacking, but not in a way that shames. Rather, it reveals where life could become more whole. When men are taught to explore and refine their desire, to trace its deeper currents, they begin to see that it is not something to be feared, but something to be followed, cautiously, but courageously. Suppression, on the other hand, severs that path. It tells the man to look away, to numb, to conform, and in doing so, it disconnects him not only from his longing, but from his identity. Because we become what we pursue, and if a man is never allowed to pursue what he truly values, he never fully becomes himself. This is not an argument for indulgence. True desire is not about gratification. It's about orientation toward the good. It asks the man, who do you want to be in relation to what you seek? Do you want the feeling or the transformation? The thrill or the meaning? The man who suppresses desire avoids these questions. The man who engages desire must answer them. That is what makes this process sacred. The problem with suppression is not just that it creates internal pressure. It is that it steals the opportunity for discernment. It prevents the man from learning the art of self-direction, from discovering what is worth wanting. The suppression of male desire is part of a larger crisis of disconnection. Men are not only alienated from their emotions or relationships, They are alienated from their atelos, their sense of end or purpose. Without that anchor, desire loses its vector. It becomes static energy. Men become trapped in cycles of passive consumption, seeking novelty to simulate the feeling of movement. But nothing changes. The soul remains stuck, and the world becomes increasingly flat, increasingly gray. The vitality that once came from the pursuit of meaningful goals is replaced by an endless scroll of stimulation that never satisfies. But this is not the end of the story. Reconnection is possible when a man begins to inquire, honestly, patiently, into the nature of his desire. He initiates a journey back to coherence. He begins to see that desire is not the enemy, but the signal. A signal that life is calling him to step forward, to carry weight, to awaken. And in that awakening, he discovers that what he thought was a burden is actually a guide. What he feared would destroy him is what can restore him. Male desire, when suppressed, fragments the soul. But when honored, questioned, and integrated, it becomes the very energy that brings him back to life.